Marv asked me to begin today, based on my considerable experience in the world of politics, to give you a political and perhaps even a psychiatric explanation of the race for President of the United States and the current political climate. I'm going to make this part of my presentation very brief by quoting Will Rogers, who captured it well many, many years ago. He said, and I quote him, "Politicians are like diapers. They have to be changed often and for the same reason," end quote. So as a reformed politician, I'm going to turn to subjects which lend themselves to a little more rational type discussion. I'm delighted to be with Marv and our good friend Jack Edlow. I saw Jack here over in the corner, and Dan Lipman, and many others on the team that have done such an extraordinary job in bringing this summit together, along with so many leaders in the nuclear field and particularly those interested and leading in the nuclear security and safety field. Your parallel industry summits have made clear your important commitment to play a leadership role in securing vital and potentially extremely dangerous, certainly beneficial, but also potentially dangerous materials as a major contribution to preventing catastrophic terrorism. You're making a major contribution. You're securing nuclear and radiological materials during their use, storage, and transportation. You're focusing on the increasing cyber threat, which Marv mentioned, and you're sharpening the safety and the security role of the nuclear industry globally. So my organization, NTI, applauds your leadership. And we do know the importance of nuclear energy in a period where we're trying to restrain carbon. Your contribution to clean energy is enormous and irreplaceable. So I thank you for your plans to continue these summits also. I think that's enormously important. The global environment today looks more challenging than even just 2 years ago when you gathered and convened in the Netherlands. Relations are badly frayed between the United States and Russia, impacting security across the entire Euro-Atlantic region and elsewhere around the globe. North Korea's nuclear tests are a sobering reminder of nuclear proliferation dangers and the continued threat from irresponsible and unpredictable states with nuclear weapons. Brutal attacks by ISIS and other organizations are on the rise, as we see in the headlines every day, as evidenced by the latest tragic assaults in Brussels and Pakistan, raising the specter of catastrophic nuclear terrorism if violent extremists get control of dangerous materials, nuclear or radiological. And this is the if that all of us must do everything we can do to prevent from happening. The stakes are very, very high. As we all know, when it comes to nuclear security and safety, there's little margin for error, and all links must be strengthened, especially the weak ones. I remember discussing that with Marv and with my friend Zach Pate many years ago when I first got out of the Senate and worked with both Marv's organization and also WANO. All links must be strengthened. Now, all the news is not bleak. There are good things that have happened and are happening. President Obama deserves our thanks and congratulations for launching the summit process in 2009 and for bringing unprecedented global attention to the risk posed by poorly secured nuclear and radiological materials. By any measure, the summits have made an enormous and important contribution to security. Nations around the world deserve credit as well, and we owe particularly thanks to the past summit hosts, South Korea and the Netherlands, for their strong leadership role. And even though Russia is not participating in this summit directly, they are here as observers, they too, in spite of the current tensions, deserve our appreciation for the role they've played since the end of the Cold War in securing nuclear materials in their own country and in helping secure nuclear materials brought back from other countries around the globe. On the plus side, In 1992, 52 countries had weapon-usable nuclear materials. In 2010, the year of the first summit, that number stood at 35. Just 6 years later, we're down to 24, as 11 more countries have eliminated their stocks of highly enriched uranium and plutonium. In addition, a dozen more countries have decreased their stocks in the last 4 years. Now, these are all solid steps, and they're in the right direction. Each step reduces risk. Each step is important. Many countries have also made new commitments to security through voluntary steps like joining international anti-terrorism initiatives. For example, the International Convention that mandates physical protection of nuclear facilities against sabotage and protection of nuclear materials in use, storage, and during transit is getting closer to entry into force. This will address a very significant gap in our global nuclear security architecture and achieve one of the summit's goals, the recognition of dangers and accountability at risk reduction. This is a long-term and continuing battle, as all of you gathered in this room know. I fear that the pace of our progress does not match the increased threat, with terrorism on the rise globally. In January, we at NTI released our NTI Nuclear Security Index. This is the third one we've released, an assessment of nuclear security conditions across 176 countries. Our 2016 index showed progress slowing across a number of trend lines, from the pace at which countries are eliminating their weapons-usable stocks to the steps they're taking to secure the remaining materials. The summits are ending, but the terrorist risks are growing. We at NTI have taken and are taking additional steps. We've concentrated for many years on weapons-usable nuclear material. We are also now working on radiological material, and we've added the cyber threat to our agenda. We urge governments to address and focus on these dangers. The cyber threat, as we all know, has expanded exponentially in recent years with a series of damaging, high-profile attacks. I'm very pleased that you have established a working group on the cyber threat in preparation for the last industry summit in the Netherlands and for this industry summit as well. We all know that neither nuclear facilities nor weapon complexes are immune from the growing danger, which is dynamic and which is challenging. Our NTI index for the first time this year examined how well governments are working to help assure protection of nuclear facilities against cyber attack. We looked at 47 countries with either weapons-usable nuclear material or nuclear facilities where an attack could result in a radiological release with serious off-site health consequences, in some cases on the scale of Fukushima. We asked several broad and very basic questions, including, is consideration of the cyber threat required in your overall threat assessment? Do you have regulations that require civilian nuclear facilities to take steps to protect against cyber attacks? We found that nearly half of these countries don't have any of these foundational legal and regulatory requirements in place. Now, this does not mean there is no protection from the cyber threat. It does mean, however, that there is a dangerous gap in governmental focus on this threat. To put it mildly, this is an area where much work needs to be done, and the principles so well known in industry of accountability has to be put into play. We at NTI are trying to bring stakeholders together to find solutions, including working with global experts in nuclear engineering and cybersecurity, as well as regulators and technology developers on an ambitious set of principles that can begin to define the rules of the road for protecting nuclear facilities. And this will, of course, be dynamic and changing because the threat is dynamic. Convening policy and military advisors is also something we've done to consider the implications of vulnerabilities in nuclear command and control systems for our nuclear policies and force posture. This is a serious and potentially deadly challenge to all nuclear weapon states. While the details in most cases are highly classified, the imperative need for attention and focus is not classified. We're exploring the idea of a team of cyber-nuclear experts to provide assistance to nuclear facility operators around the world in the event of a problem. And in this area, if this idea proves to be worthwhile, I'm sure industry will have to play a huge role. The response, like the threat, must be dynamic and sustainable. The good and the bad news in this overall cyber world is that digital innovation moves more quickly than government regulatory process. That's why a broad spectrum of stakeholders must weigh in. I know you've done important work in this area, and we hope you will build on this, and I think governments will be able to learn a great deal from what you already do in this arena. Another important area of concern includes radiological materials. We call radiological a weapon of mass disruption. It is, of course, less catastrophic than a terrorist with a nuclear weapon, but it is a much higher probability threat, and the word disruption understates the possible devastating economic consequences if certain types of radiation is released in critical areas. Imagine what it would mean to see Wall Street, the Port of Rotterdam, or the Singapore airport become a no-go zone overnight and for years to come. The economic consequences would be huge. The good news is that leaders addressed radiological terrorism for the first time at the 2014 summit, and I'm expecting a lot more attention on that in this summit. At least that's my hope. 23 countries pledged to secure their most dangerous sources by the end of 2016. These countries deserve our thanks. In a new report NTI released last week, we found that 22 of those countries have met or are on track to meet their commitments. That's the good news. At the same time, the 23 countries that make that pledge represent only 14% of the IAEA member states. Thousands of potentially vulnerable sources remain in hospitals, research centers, and industry. Just one prime source in one blood irradiator in one hospital could provide enough cesium to deny access for years and do billions in damage to any major city. So it's not enough to add more locks or guards, although that too is required. Where feasible, we must replace this equipment with alternative technology that is safe, reliable, and cost-effective when it is available. Some alternatives are on the market now, but we need to accelerate the development of the new alternative technologies with less risk. Governments must strengthen the regulatory framework, and we must robustly fund the IAEA in this crucial area. I'm sure Director General Amano, I think he's following me later today in the program, I know that he will agree that the IAEA budget really needs beefing up from governments all over the world. I was on a group about 7, 8, 9 years ago called Eminent Persons that basically, even at that time, was advocated very strongly that the IAEA's budget had to be increased, and that remains a challenge today. NTI recently worked with advisors from a half dozen countries and a number of international organizations, including the IAEA and the International Irradiation Association, to develop additional recommendations in this arena. You can find them in our new Radiological Security Progress Report, which is available online. The private sector provides a vital contribution to our society by supplying essential nuclear technology for the benefit of mankind and as we saw from your excellent film, to help treat tens of millions of patients around the world every year. We support strengthening the role of the private sector and very much support your efforts to raise awareness about these threats and the vital responsibility to secure all of these materials everywhere. Industry must also take steps to increase security by improving security culture, engaging in ongoing personnel training, developing systems to test security on a regular basis, and advocating and implementing best practices. I believe Roger Housley and the World Institute for Nuclear Security, I think he's here this morning, and I know that they are working in this area and will be delighted to help. In addition, liability and insurance gaps must be carefully reviewed by those possessing radiological sources with exposure to high risk. I'm very pleased that Atlanta's Emory Hospital will receive an award from this association tomorrow for helping to lead the way and show the way in this important work. And I saw this morning early Patty Ollinger, who is here representing Emory. Emory recently replaced a blood irradiator that contained cesium-137, a long-standing radiological source that could be used if it got in the wrong hands to build a dirty bomb. Emory will use an FDA-approved alternative technology that is commercially available and greatly reduces the public security risk and the liability risk to the hospital. I would call this a win-win all the way around, and I encourage more hospitals and research centers to follow Emory's example. So Patty, thank you for your work and for Emory's example. The 23 countries that signed on to the Radiological Security Commitment in 2014 deserve our thanks and commendation, and I hope that all countries will follow suit. These are global threats and require global responses. On a range of issues involving nuclear and radiological security, participation and cooperation among all governments is crucial because a terrorist act involving these materials anywhere in the world will affect us all, and I know this industry is very conscious of that fact. The United States and Russia, which hold the vast majority of nuclear weapons and materials, have a special responsibility to lead. So it is particularly dangerous that relations between the U.S. and Russia have become so negative at a time when terrorist threats are growing. For more than 2 decades after the Cold War, the U.S. and Russia partnered to secure and eliminate dangerous nuclear materials, not as a favor to one another, but as a common sense contribution and commitment born of mutual self-interest to protect against catastrophic nuclear terrorism. Unfortunately, this common sense cooperation has become the latest casualty of the spiraling crisis in relations between the United States, Europe, and Russia. It is abundantly clear, at least to me, that unless we change course together, we risk leaving behind a more dangerous world for our children and for our grandchildren. I believe that rebuilding trust is essential, and I also believe it is possible, step by step, by solving problems and reducing risk together. There are many challenges ahead, including finding ways to step back from another costly and dangerous arms race. In the immediate future, both the United States and Russia should be able to agree that the threat posed by terrorist organizations affects the core and vital interests of both of our countries. I recently suggested in Moscow and in Washington that President Obama and President Putin should announce a joint working group focusing on the terrorist threat. This group would include and probably be led by energy departments, intelligence agencies, and other defense departments with a clear goal, but a very important goal, to prevent ISIS, Al-Qaeda, or any other violent extremist group from getting possession of nuclear, radiological, chemical, or biological weapons or materials. There's ample authority for this type of U.S.-Russia leadership under existing UN resolutions. No, this would not solve all the Euro-Atlantic security problems or the Middle East problems, but it could avoid possible catastrophes while we try and struggle to work on these problems. My final point, the progress made through the nuclear security summits and through your nuclear industry summits shows what can be done when governments work together and when they work closely with the private sector, this group in particular. We are in a race between cooperation and catastrophe. We must run faster. I am confident that with your help and your leadership, we will do exactly that. Thank you very much.